Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast. Join us each week as sports scientist and founder of Athletica AI, Dr. Paul Laursen, athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, coach and cyclist Paul Warloski, and everyday athletes discuss training, racing, and improving health and fitness. Get ready for your journey to peak performance. Hello and welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. Our goal on this podcast is to help everyday athletes improve their health and fitness so they can improve their performance over time. However, sometimes our health can go sideways because or due to our training. Paul, can you talk to us about what AFib is, or atrial fibrillation?
Yeah. This one, I don't know. So I follow, Paul, a lot of the forums, in particular, of course, the Athletica forum, but I also follow more traditionally the Slow Twitch forum. And I know a lot of our endurance athletes will probably be on that one as well. But I cannot get over the number of, reports of different heart issues that people are expressing. Most notably, actually, I'll just start. So two of my heroes, two of the big four they used to be called, Scott Tinley and Dave Scott, are both going in as we speak. They're probably actually, as we're in recording, they're on the table for open heart surgery for aortic aneurysms. We'll get to those ones later, but the ones that's more reported in athletes, and I just pull up, here's the most recent post, just came through literally minutes ago from Slow Twitch. This is in AFib, and here's what the guy reported. The guy, I Run MD, reported in a gravel race, he was feeling great, strong up to mile 65, 70, and then he started feeling a fluttering in the chest and just an overall, I don't feel so good. Thought it might be electrolyte imbalance or my hydration was off. Pushing a little bit more made me aware of this weird chest sensation. So I pushed pretty easy for the rest of the race. Pretty smart. So that he was encountering this AFib, or atrial fibrillation. My dad has this as well, as an older gent that's just winding down in his cycling years. So it kind of like, what are we talking about here? We can certainly see some symptoms, right? But there's this palpitations or fatigue and fluttering that's kind of you're experiencing in the chest. And so we should also go back and say, well, when we talk about atrial fibrillation, we're talking about the upper chambers of the heart, the atrias. Remember, you've got your atrias are the upper chambers, and you got your ventricles, which are the lower chambers. So this is, for some reason, something in the upper chambers starts to go off a little bit, and they take the whole thing out of sync. Now, if you go back more to that guy's thread, it's taking a long time for the heart to slow itself down. So it's really gets kind of out of whack. Why is this occurring?
Yeah.
And why is this occurring a little bit more in athletes? Hard to actually know, but it's like there's this big return of blood that's often happening into these chambers. And, that potentially also with health aspects that we can talk on a little bit later contributes to some sort of these erratic oscillations. And remember that there's electrical events that are going in here. So for some reason, the electrical events of the heart, and particularly those in the atria, are out of sync all of a sudden. So maybe you guys have any experiences, Paul, Marjaana, yourself with this occurrence of AFib?
Well, I have had similar problems. Mine are not AFib, mine are ventricular tachycardia, which is the similar instances, but in the ventricles as opposed to the atrias. And it's kind of the surly older brother of AFib in terms of it can be a little bit more serious and it can bring on more of an attack. But it tends to be, a little bit more subdued. I don't have it all the time. It just pops up. one of the things that happened, though, once I discovered, and this just happened last year when I turned 60, I noticed once I put it out on the social medias, so many people, especially men, responded, yes, I have AFib. Yes, I've had VT, and it's been very similar. So is there a prevalence in endurance athletes compared to the general population that you've known of?
Well, it's so I revert. I just disclaimer. I'm no expert in this, but I revert to my colleague who's very famous, Dr. Phil Maftone, who's wrote a just a section on this in the Hit Science textbook on the athlete heart and sudden athlete death. And his thinking was that, well, in fact, the prevalence might not necessarily be greater, but it's more, it's more, these events get purported in the media a lot more. So you certainly hear about them a lot because it's kind of unexpected, right? You don't think that an athlete is going to have any of these sorts of issues. The other point, I just reviewed the section in the book, Phil also makes, is that there's often an underlying health issue that might be predisposing the athletes to this. That's, again, we always think that our athletes are the healthiest of beings. They look that, but there can be, within the insides, there can still be these issues that that have accumulated over years. And so yeah, I think the question is, Paul, is we don't really know, but there's certainly differences in how the heart would behave, especially when we look to our athletes that are pushing a lot of mid-zone training. It seems that mid-zone training is the likely culprit of these occurrences, and potentially the when these sort of, not just the occurrence, but how this kind of comes about. And especially if we look to Dave Scott Tinley, or Under the Knife right now as we speak, you think about these guys throughout their life, right? Think of how much mid-zone kind of training they probably were doing. They were, diesel engines, probably very good at it, raced a lot. And, anecdotally, when you read, you listen to some of their social medias, platforms are still kind of going at a later age. A lot of pushing for, and they're, for many, many years. And that's a lot of work on the heart, right? And and again, if we look to both, it's amazing. The two of the big four are in the same boat, going under for surgery at the same time. It's quite uncanny, but it's they have aortic aneurysm. So in their situation, the aorta has distended, and so much so that it's it could actually burst if they don't get this surgery. It can actually burst. So that's, again, think about the pressure that's always happening in the aorta there. In the case of the AFib, again, we've got all this backflow of blood that's coming into the atria that maybe doesn't occur as much in the general population that isn't exercising. So yeah, there's certainly big differences, Paul, in the overall behavior of the blood flow to the heart in an athlete versus a sedentary individual. And maybe it's this type, specifically these incidences are more prevalent, because why would these sorts of things occur in individuals that aren't getting large blood flows to their heart? The other point that Phil makes is that it should, despite these issues that we see and are highly purported, it shouldn't be something that stops us from exercising, and that's really important. They are, we see them a lot, and especially because we're all glued to social media and the like, they come in our face, but the same principles still apply. A balanced, holistic approach to training with health first, as we purport in throughout the Athletica, companies. This still makes most sense to be best practice out there. And yes, these things might occur, but just be aware. Listen to your body. Screening, all these sorts of things are we should kind of save you in the end.
Yeah, and I think like for listener, keep in mind that oftentimes as endurance athletes, we're so in tune with our bodies. We know our strong heart muscle that has gotten stronger and larger. Our resting heart rate is usually a lot lower than a normal population, and we kind of like we can feel any arrhythmia or any abnormality a lot sooner than a regular population who don't exercise, right? I have 3 leaky valves, apparently, but the doctor that I saw, he said, nothing to worry about, just keep checking it every couple of years. And I've heard, like, for women, as we approach menopause and after menopause, when our estrogen is lower, that we should always get a 2-year heart check, just to monitor our heart health. But what is it about specifically intensity around that mid-zone, zone 3, like between that nice zone 2 and then the high intensity that we do above the threshold that is so loading for heart health?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I'm just guessing, right? Like with a bit of experience behind me. And it's probably you're close towards your max stroke volume. So for a long time, right? Remember when we ride in our zone 2 or L2 below, the heart's working, but it's not it's the stroke volume isn't towards maximal. And then when we start to get into zone 3, we'll call it mid zone, and 4 and 5, there's this big kick in stroke volume. And remember that, I guess, mid zone sort of training, if we're performing a lot in there or towards threshold, your stroke volume is really kicking up there. The blood flow is really kind of kicking up there. And I'm just kind of guessing, but I'm imagining that that's just a lot more of a heavy hammer on the heart, because it's just poof, poof, it's just really starting to get that big load of blood flow through it, right? Which is so critical for performance. And no question, we want to have that happening when we're racing, and we do need to prepare for that as well. But I guess it's just we have to be mindful of that, and balance it out. Is it not to say you shouldn't do it, but it's just I don't. You certainly is a strong suggestion that kind of a more polarized approach to your training might be a healthier sort of option, so that you're getting the majority of your training in the lower ends of the stroke volume, right? Remember, the stroke volume is how much blood the heart beats every beat. And then so the bulk kind of at a lower level, but then also don't forget your high intensity work, where you're going to really give the heart a good jolt, but there'll be recovery between that, right? So this is why we want those recovery days. Like Marjaana, a classic example, she's just done some big training over the weekend, and we're just talking now before the podcast about how she's going to go into this real recovery moment that Gorda Byrne spoke about on the Training Science podcast, and we've done lots of little clips to promote those things, where he's really, you bulk in that training load, but then make sure you're really, the recovery days are also just as important, so that the body kind of heals himself there. And conversely, maybe the thing that you don't want to do is go back and start doing more mid-zone sort of thing, because you sort of can. That's the crazy thing, is that we are equipped as human beings to keep that mid-zone training. You can almost kind of do it day in, day out. You burn yourself out. It leads to overtraining. We know that. But here's another thing where we're guessing, total guess, but it's probably a contributor to the unhealthy athlete profile and potentially some of these occurrences of arrhythmias and the various different heart health issues that we're speaking about here in the podcast.
So the more polarized model would be better because the high intensity is shorter and we do less of it, but we still get the benefits that we need for the training stimulus.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, there's a time and place for the mid-zone training, certainly for principal specificity when you're building up to your gravel race or your Ironman or your 70.3, et cetera, but maybe not all the time, right? And yeah, it's kind of we need to sort of swing through the various different blocks. And again, back to Gordo Burn, those recovery blocks, recovery periods, are just as important as the specific quality stuff that we're talking about.
I noticed that last summer when I was deep in the midst of the VT problems, the ventricular tachycardia, I noticed I started noticing there was a problem when I started getting dropped when my heart was causing problems. Are there issues that you have noticed with an athlete's performance in terms of how they perform in racing or in training?
How do you feel like when you're having VT?
So the first thing that I start to feel is, the fluttering in my heart, as if my heart starts to beat, and then I can start to see it on my device, on my Garmin, that my heart rate is starting to increase. In fact, Garmin just told me, as while we were talking here, that I had a really big training week last week because my heart rate was at 180 and 190 and 200 for several rides. Because my heart issues are back. We've talked about that before. I had an ablation last fall that seemed like it cured, and then they came back doing an interval a couple weeks ago, and I did some rides last week, and definitely the big thing that I notice is that I just can't go very hard because my heart is pounding, and any kind of effort, I end up slowing down. Like I did a 3-hour ride yesterday at 15 miles an hour, which is okay, but for me that's pretty slow, and I don't feel as good. So there's definitely a change I'm having to make. Doing group rides, I'm not really able to do them because I'm riding that slowly, and I'm also I'm talking with my doctor a lot, and we are. He says as long as you're feeling okay, that when the heart rate goes up, that's okay. It's not ideal, obvious, but I'm not going to have a problem. It's when I start to feel faint, if I start feeling lightheaded, any kind of chest pain, obviously, those are bigger warning signs where I need to, call it a day and stop. But I'm facing, maybe not racing, at least not at a kind of harder level. I'm just going to be riding my bike, which is okay. But it's definitely going to be an adjustment. Have we seen any kind of sex or age difference in the development of AFib or any of these heart issues?
Yeah, for sure, Paul. Unfortunately, you're right in the right in the category of higher risk. So it tends to be more males that get this, and tends to be older athletes as well, right? So more time on tension ultimately as older athletes, and I think probably the male incidence probably tends to be because there is or at least there has been in the past, more males engaged in these sorts of endurance activities. It's probably changing a little bit now, but yeah. So yeah, currently that's where that sort of hits. But yeah, no, I think that that was similar advice that was given to my dad as well. Was you can still kind of go out there and do that, but you really have to be aware of how you're feeling, and especially if you start to get lightheaded, you got to know when to sort of call these sorts of things, and especially if you're talking on a bike, right? Like you're on a moving vehicle that kind of can go to speed, so you got to be certainly careful in that context. And then of course, how else can we make further assessments, Paul? So I would imagine, Paul, you've been hooked up to one of those electrocardiogram devices in either in your doctor's office or in a clinician's office that he's referred you to.
Yeah, last week I actually had one, and what they do for that is look for structural issues and to make sure that there aren't structural problems and that it's still just an electrical problem. And because those are two different things. If there were structural issues, it would be a different story. But those are clean for me, which is good. It's just I have a slightly enlarged heart, because of being an athlete, and that's it's good, and it's functioning well. It just gets off the rails sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I was doing a little bit of research on this. What we tend to see in your ECG electrocardiogram. Again, remember, hooked up 12 lead ECGs. We tend to see like a flat or depressed P wave, right? So it's the PQRS complex. So when I guess the voltage is going through the atria to make the atria's top chambers contract. It just it's usually depressed or flatlined, so we just don't see much action happening there, right? So, and you can just imagine if the atrias, the top chambers, aren't really contracting. This is in AFib. I think this is different than you, Paul, but in AFib, most people are kind of talking about those atrias are just sort of not engaged. So, and maybe that's why you get this flutter response, right? It's the ventricles in the that are fluttering and working. It's like, it's like, hey, give me some blood and let me push that through. So so that's kind of what we will tend to see, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, what did yours in under rest, Paul? Your ECG was looking okay?
Yes. Yeah, so that was good. And then I had to do the first round. I had to do the stress test and the EKG, and then one other test looking for structural heart issues, and all of that was clean.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. Technology continues to go forward. This is one of the companies that we collaborate with. They're called Frontier. They make a heart rate monitor called the Frontier X2, which you can actually wear during exercise, and it just looks like a classic Polar or Garmin chest strap or whatever you use, and but it's actually measuring real-time ECG, so you can actually hook that up to your computer and see it while you exercise. You could be on the trainer and moving around, and just like Paul did, where he did like in the clinic, he can do a stress test, what he's referring to, but you can do this yourself actually and get your own sort of data. So that's quite fascinating and interesting technology that's now come to the forefront. And again, you can really start to pinpoint some of these potential issues. Share them with your doctor, because you can totally get every heartbeat actually measured in an ECG trace while you go and do a 5-hour ride if you wanted. So that's how incredible the technology is there.
That's cool. Is there other complications that, like, say somebody has an AFib and totally just ignores it? I can see that happen. if you get into a AFib during your ride and you get dizzy, of course you can, get seriously hurt, pass out and hurt yourself. But down the line, is there like a higher risk of developing stroke or anything like that?
I think this one is so massive, Marjaana, that like you kind of can't ignore this one. It's so catastrophic, right? Like it's like basically, if you had any intent in shifting into zone 3, 4, and 5, you just can't do that anymore, right? Mm-hmm. You look at the thread on Slow Twitch that we started. The guy had to limp home basically at zone 1, 2 the rest of the ride. He just basically, he no longer had access to the cardiac output that he needed to do what his brain wanted him to do.
So you can't will through.
You can't will through it. It's just anaerobic metabolism just won't do it.
Okay.
You need your aerobic metabolism, and if your heart isn't delivering the oxygenated blood at rapid rates that we need when we exercise, you're just going to fully know about it, and you're going to feel awful, right? You're going to feel lightheaded. You're going to feel dizzy. You're going to feel that flutter. You might even feel nauseous. I don't know, Paul, am I missing any symptoms that you possibly feel?
Those are all of them. And with both, VT can be a little bit, I described it as the surly older brother, because it can be a little more serious, but sudden heart attacks are entirely possible, on the bike, on the run. It can happen right there. So it's definitely, I trifled with it last summer because I thought it was just, nerves or something. I don't know what I thought it was. I just ignored it. But when I went into the first doctor, maybe, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but he took a look at me and he looked at my data and he looked at me again. He said, "I'm just glad you're not dead." And it's like, oh, this is a little more serious than I thought it was. And that's, it's a reality that I think, we have to face. And that kind of brings me to, a question. I remember taking on a new coaching client, and he is in his 50s. And that was one of the questions he asked me: do I need to be worried about AFib? And what do you think?
Well, I think it's not really. The incidence, as we spoke about, is low across the general population, and it might be a little bit higher in athletes due to what we're sort of talking about here. Males and age, but it's kind of, there is, but you could get screened if there's any worry. There's the full level of screening that you're speaking about, Paul, is always a possibility. And if there's any concern, well, why not? It's never going to hurt to go get tested if you're concerned about this. But if you've led a generally fairly healthy life, and you've exercised in various different sports, then it's not something that I would go and recommend and do necessarily. But conversely, if you've, maybe in the context where you've had, admittedly, an unhealthy life, and there's any feelings of anxiety around the health of the heart, then to me, it's, that in that context, probably prudent to go and get the same workup that you did with your doctor, Paul.
Does nutrition play in the role here?
Well, that's what Phil and Naftone, I alluded to before, and I believe can contribute. But it's, we're guessing, right? So, but I even, I think to my own poor nutrition habits that I succumbed to in my late teens, early 20s and 30s, and drinking 2-liter Coke a day at some points during there, thinking I was doing the right thing because I was putting carbohydrates into my system to train harder. That's, I wasn't living a healthy life. So and that's those moments. I think many of us have had those And those add up over the lifetime of a human. I'm probably feeling the effects of some of my hip arthritis that's probably contributed to that along the way, if I'm being honest. So we all have these moments and stuff in our life, and I believe those can contribute to the development of these issues. In other words, there's likely both an environmental on top of a genetic predisposition to any of these sorts of things.
What advice would you give to athletes who recently been diagnosed with AFib?
Well, like Paul, I would definitely go and don't be a hero, and really listen to the real effect, and go and see your GP, and if the GP isn't really being helpful, go see another GP until you get the help and the assessment that you're after. I wouldn't dismiss it if you know intuitively that things aren't right. Then go get the help that you need. And
I could imagine somebody who is looking fit and healthy walking into a GP's office, like, what are you doing here? Like, I can see many doctors would just dismiss that.
Yeah, you got to get the right doctor, right? Like that's so key. And every doctor is unique, just like all of us humans are unique. So if use your own common sense. If you're not getting the information or the help that you feel you need to, then you need to move on to the next one. There's lots of doctors out there. And I guess I just add another thought. Like, this is I've been through this whole thing when I was with New Zealand Olympic program with one of the, maybe I won't say the name, but one of the elite female athletes who was, she was at the time, I believe she was ranked number 8 in the world in the ITUs. And so she had this, and she had because we haven't talked about solutions, there's surgical solutions. What she had was something called a laser ablation, where because the atrias were, not basically the wires or the nerves in the atrias were not, they were moved the wrong way, and not, so she wasn't getting the same sort of kick to her atrias to push that blood down. They had the laser ablation. So basically, as I understand it, the surgeon goes in there and carves new pathways for the nerves through that atria, so that the everything kind of kicks through and starts working again. So, and she successfully had the surgery, kicked back, and performed in the Olympics. So there are successful, she would have been in her early 30s at the time, but there are successful procedures that can occur for athletes that have these electrical issues, heart issues. And you even look at, Dave Scott and Scott Tinley are under the knife right now as we speak. They're going to get solutions for their aortic stenoses that they're going in for as well. So all of these things have the potential to be fixed. Don't be discouraged if you have these issues. You included, Paul, and just keep pushing the conversation forward, the communication forward of your issues with your medical team, and work towards a solution for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's where we're going. We're trying to, decide the second round here. What's the best course? Do we do another ablation, where they actually kind of go in through one of your arteries and come into your heart and they burn a spot? Do we get on some medication? I'm kind of loath to get on medication, but if it works, it works. And, depending on what the side effects might be, or we just leave it and, see what happens from that. So this was a complicated conversation to do our 3 takeaways here, and I'm going to give it a shot. And if either one of you two want to chime in afterwards, I would say number 1 the AFib and heart issues that we've been talking about are serious. Get medical help. Have your doctor run the tests. Be careful, because this could be fatal. Number two, if you don't have heart issues, it is more likely, that a polarized kind of plan where you are doing a lot of slow volume and then shorter stints of hard kind of intensity might be a better option, simply because there's less time that your heart is super stressed. And third, AFib and ventricular tachycardia and other heart kind of abnormalities shouldn't be something that stops you from exercising. One of the things that we talk a lot about on this podcast and with Athletica is that, the same principle of balanced, holistic approach to training, that you are taking care of your good health.
That's perfect, Paul. I couldn't add any more.
All right. So that is all for this week. Keep in mind, if you suspect you have AFib or VT, you should see your doctor immediately. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for the Athletes Compass podcast. You can help us by asking your training questions in the comments, liking and sharing the podcast, giving us 5-star reviews, and engaging with us on social media. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I'm Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your North Star through the sometimes complicated world of training for your endurance sport. For a deeper dive into the science of endurance sports, listen to the Training Science podcast and check out the adaptive AI training platform, Athletica AI. And thanks.